Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into investor Ray Dalio's framework for understanding the epic shifts in world power. How empires rise and eventually fall.
You see it in the headlines every single day, right? The growing tension between the United States and China. It feels like this huge, unprecedented moment in history, but is it really? Or are we just watching a familiar old story play out all over again? To get some answers, we're going to look at the work of Ray Dalio. And his approach is pretty unique. Think of him less like a historian and more like a doctor. He studies hundreds of past cases, past empires, to diagnose what's happening with countries today. So Dalio literally went back 500 years. He studied the Dutch, the British, all the great empires. And by looking at all this data, he found this amazingly clear, repeating pattern for how nations rise and fall. He calls it the big cycle. Okay, so this big cycle has a few moving parts. 5 major forces, to be exact. But to really get a grip on what's happening right now with the US and China, we're going to zero in on the 3 that matter most. So what's this cycle look like? Well, it usually kicks off right after a major war. A new power takes charge, and you get this period of peace and prosperity. But over time, that success leads to things like financial bubbles and big gaps between the rich and the poor. Eventually, that bubble bursts, which causes a lot of economic pain and unrest. And that chaos often leads to another huge conflict, which, you guessed it, starts the whole cycle over again with a new world order.
The first key force to watch is the debt cycle. This is all about how a country manages its money. Because when a nation racks up too much debt, it becomes incredibly fragile. It's a vulnerability that can bring the whole system down. Second, you've got internal conflict. This is what happens when a country basically starts fighting with itself. The gap between the wealthy and everyone else gets too wide, political sides stop talking to each other, and compromise becomes impossible. The country just starts to tear itself apart from the inside.
And that brings us to the third, and maybe the most dramatic force, external conflict. This is that classic age-old story, right? The rising star directly challenging the reigning champ for the top spot.
Okay, so we've got the theory. Let's make it real. How does this framework look when we apply it to the world's current reigning power, the United States? Well, Dalio's model suggests the U.S. is showing all the classic signs of being in a late and much more dangerous stage of the cycle.
First, let's talk debt. The U.S. is carrying a massive debt load, and it's projected to just keep growing. In Dalio's framework, this is a huge red flag. It's a classic symptom of a late-stage empire that's become financially vulnerable.
And at the very same time, that internal conflict cycle is at a boiling point. Political division is at historic highs. People aren't just disagreeing anymore. They view the other side as the enemy. And as Dalio points out, when that happens, a country gets weaker and weaker from the inside out.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin and talk about the classic rising power in this story, China. Just look at this. The scale of China's transformation is absolutely staggering. It is, without a doubt, one of the greatest economic miracles in all of human history. We're talking hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty in just a few decades.
But, and this is a really big but, that incredible rise comes with its own set of serious problems. China's dealing with its own gigantic internal debt bubble. And at the same time, the government's tightening control is creating a climate of fear that's actually starting to slow down the very economic engine that powered its incredible ascent.
So what happens when a reigning power that's showing signs of decline slams into a rising power that's facing its own major internal pressures? Dalio's work tells us that this is the danger zone. This is exactly when the risk of a major conflict goes way, way up.
And this right here illustrates the standoff perfectly. You have the U.S. with the incredible power of the world's reserve currency, but it's weakened by its debt and its internal division. And on the other side, you have China, an absolute titan of manufacturing, but it's held back by its own internal politics. It's a true clash of titans, and each one has some major strengths, but also some critical weaknesses.
The historical parallel that Dalio draws here is, well, it's pretty sobering. He's saying that what we're seeing right now looks a whole lot like the 1930s, that tense, unstable decade that led right up to World War II.
So, here's the crucial part. This framework isn't just about diagnosing the problem. It's also about giving us a checklist. It tells us what we should all be watching for, the key signs that tell us whether things are heading toward conflict or cooperation.
So here's what to keep your eyes on. How are those debt levels looking? Are politicians actually working together, or is everything a fight? Are the trade and tech wars getting worse? Are countries shifting their alliances, picking sides? And of course, maybe the biggest one of all, who's winning the race for the future in tech, like AI and computer chips? The answers to these questions are going to tell us a lot about where we're headed.
But you know, in the end, after all the data, all the cycles, all the history, Dalio leaves us with this really powerful thought. He says that beyond all of these vast, impersonal forces, the outcome isn't actually set in stone. The final variable, the one that could change everything, is simply the choices that people make and how we all decide to deal with one another.